Lying's interesting, isn't it? You talk to some teachers and they say that's all children ever do. Any opportunity to lie, they will. And how close is that to creativity? We've just had April Fool's Day and some of the most brilliant lies there to entertain us and just to make us laugh. Check out this advert to see what I mean. Brilliant, isn't it? It's got nanny-assisted power steering. It's in royal blue. It's a wonderful Mickey take of what it is to be a royal mother. It's got four-wheel drive and even extendable flagpoles. You've got to love it, haven't you? And that's what lying is. Fun. And then there's lying that gets out of hand. One student of mine told me she had a brain tumour. I'm very concerned. I rang home to realise this was completely untrue. She just wanted a bit of attention. And this kind of figure is one that this poem deals with, at least at the start. And then, as usual with Caroline Duffy, she tries to make it a universal experience and asks us to consider how much of our life is based on a lie. Cheerful, eh? So in the first verse we start off quite safely in that the person under attack is she, somebody else, not us. And she made things up. But hang on, isn't that a description of Caroline Duffy? Isn't that what she does as a poet? Here she is imagining herself into the head of other people. And that's exactly what writers do. And so partly this is an exploration of herself. And for example, that she was really a man. And this could be a kind of in-joke here. I don't know how much her sexuality has cost her in her life. She's poet laureate now, but 10 years before she was considered many people's favourites, but was not accepted into the royal bosom, as it were. And I think this poem is partly a reply to that, as we'll see in the final verse. And Caroline Duffy may have been taunted by just this sort of thing. Her sexuality would open her up to this kind of accusation, oh well, you're really a man underneath it, aren't you, as an insult. But here, the fantasist, the liar, takes on that identity herself, as though Duffy is trying to reclaim the insult and turn it into something positive. Consequently, the apparent tone of accusation, she was him all right, can also be read differently. She was him, all right in her head, as though this was a positive thing. And the positive is again emphasised by Oxfam. Yes, she's poor and she's having to buy second hand, but on the other hand, she's conscious of charity may not be poor at all. He was called Susan, actually. We can hear the tone of the liar, but also we see through that. The eyes in the mirror knew that, but she could stare them out. There's something about having an inner steel, an inner identity that doesn't respond or isn't downhearted and downbeaten by the reaction of others. She could stare them out. And so we've got a peculiar character here, one that perhaps we should dislike, but also we should admire. In the second verse, if we were thinking of condemning this woman, suddenly Duffy makes that more difficult because she identifies this woman with us. Of course a job, of course a humdrum city flat. This describes thousands of us, doesn't it? Of course the usual friends. And the word usual here jumps out at us. What is she saying about our choice of friendships? How they're based on convention or what people expect, and not really necessarily on people who would deserve our company. How hard do we work to meet interesting real people? Lover? Sometimes. The same again. Sometimes suggests that this person is chosen merely because they're convenient, because sex is on offer. And how many people are in relationships like that? She lived like you do. Suddenly, we're brought face to face with this character, and by implication, we also are liars. And then this marvellous transformation of imagery here, a dozen slack rope ends in each dream hand. What a way to describe the hopes and memories of somebody's life. Slack rope ends because they're all lives not lived. They're all choices that we didn't make but could have done and perhaps should have done. And this is where the lying comes in. We're like a puppet master, and we're controlling the story of our own lives. And here, the liar is honestly looking at her life and left the rope end slack. She's no longer manipulating that story. She's suddenly seeing her life for what it is. And how many of us do that? How many of us look at the dream hand and fantasize about it and tweak it and retell the story of our lives in more positive ways, trying to make ourselves feel better and look better in the eyes of others? When she can't face the slackness anymore, she starts tugging on them, trying to recreate a more interesting life, but she tugs on it uselessly. But how many of us do that? Rework old memories or think to a future that we might imagine to be better. The tragedy of our liar here is that she knows it's useless even as she does it. She told stories. Again, this brings us straight back to the writer, straight back to Duffy. Yes, she's accusing us, but she includes herself in this accusation, maybe even more so, because her life is lived out through stories in a much more literal way than ours is. In Moscow once, I nearly drowned. Rotten. Rotten perhaps because we condemn the liar, but also perhaps the writer rejects it as a story that just isn't very good. In the third verse, Duffy again plays with this contrast. She starts out with the italics, lightning struck me and I'm here to tell. And this is really bad writing, isn't it? I'm here to tell. Imagine listening to somebody who was declaiming, announcing something fantastic in this way. The reaction here is clear. Liar. But it gets worse than that. Look at the fricative F's. Falsehood, fiction, fib. Look at your mouth in the mirror as you say those words. Your face bares its teeth. It's something animalistic. It's why our swear words have F's in them and begin that way, because we're baring our teeth as though about to bite. It's a savage thing, instantly recognisable in animals, and it's no coincidence, I think, that our language does this, bares our teeth as we swear in this way. And so, complete condemnation. But as usual, Duffy flips this on its head straight away with another surprising image. They were pebbles tossed at the evening's pool. And suddenly the use of S's, this sibilance, gives a sudden peace and calmness. Tossed at an evening's pool. How many of us have stood by water early in the evening and felt that sense of peace? And suddenly we see the lies in a different light. They're a way of calming, a way of making a life feel better. Her bright eyes fixed on the ripples. And suddenly that's a description of us, isn't it? And it's definitely a description of the writer. Why the writer? Because of this word. It leaps out to us in the middle of those three words beginning with F. Fiction. And this is the bread and butter of Duffy's world. It's what the writer does. And also, of course, we are the reader. It's what we appreciate. It's not the lie that we object to. It's the bad lie. The lie in italics here that lets it down. But the well-imagined lie, the poem, is something that we celebrate. And we do it all the time. Look at how she looks at it. Our secret films are private affairs watched behind the eyes. Suddenly these are like dreams. This furniture of the mind that she keeps coming back to. We can replay works of fiction without them in front of us, just through memory and language. She spoke in subtitles. It's not the problem that she's lying, it's just the lies are more difficult to grasp, like a film that's come from a foreign country. Not on. Well, a nice little joke there. This film isn't on because typically we turn them off. It's typical in Britain. Go to Holland, for example, and everyone watches English things with subtitles on, and that's why they speak English so well. They've learnt the language just by watching. As a poet, she must be painfully aware of how few people actually read poetry, and even fewer actually go out and buy it, and this is her livelihood. But no, she is not on because she's a poet, and I think there's a lot of resentment there. And if we return to the title, the idea of the liar is possibly how she feels treated as a writer who always concentrates on universal truths, has to lie to make her fictions acceptable to the readers. The last verse is a sudden jump. She takes us right away from this universal idea of the writer and this universal idea of how we all lie, and straight to the fate of this woman. She played with the stolen child. We're suddenly in tabloid territory. Someone who's been kidnapped, a woman who's desperate for a child but can't have one perhaps. You know the rest. We fill in the blanks. We make up our own fiction. But hold on, that means we too are lying, doesn't it? Maybe through stereotype, maybe through prejudice, or maybe through imagination, something positive. But we have to make up the rest. It's a really clever way of ending the poem. She's forcing us to lie in order to complete the fiction. And she's again showing that lying is an essential part of human creativity and human life. The man in the long white, and of course we're specting here, coat, but the alliteration drives us to this really weird idea. The man in the long white wig who found her sadly confused. And suddenly we've got this image of a real person who's losing their mind being found by someone else who, hold on, is also a liar, dressed up as something that he's not. Why would a man wear a long white wig? It's hilarious and unexplained and just left there. We leap straight away to the top psychiatrist who studied her in jail, then went back home and did what he does every night to the Princess of Wales. And this is laden with irony. The psychiatrist is a fantasist. The Princess of Wales, always in the tabloid news at the time, a clothes horse, a figure of beauty, a fantasy object impossible to attain. The psychiatrist seems now, in his own mind, no different to the liar. And perhaps Duffy is accusing us all of being like this. This is what fuels the tabloid press, but we buy it and we read it. We are the people living out these fantasies in another form. And then finally, that brings us back to the whole laureate idea and the fact that Duffy was passed over. And you can look at this response as... And we could read this poem as a response to that disappointment, this public criticism, not accepting her as the poet laureate, even though she is clearly the best-selling poet in the country. And I wonder whether the royal family has appreciated this, having read it. Of course, that's the other thing. People don't read poetry. And why should they? Because it's brilliant!